All right, everybody. Welcome aboard. Ron with Sandcar Services. We have another Mendeola 2D on the bench. This is Joel's transmission. How you doing, Joel? Joel sent this thing on a pallet, FedEx, all the way from Colorado for me to look at it. He's told me over the phone that it was whining on deceleration. It was making noise after he had pulled somebody out. Don't remember exactly which one, but he was yanking another car. And I will walk you guys through some of the damage that has happened in this transmission. Now, I don't place the blame on all this damage strictly on one pull of pulling somebody out, although I do believe that there was some worn parts that probably just left the chat once that stress hit it. This transmission, in my opinion, probably should have been refreshed before it failed. There's signs in here that it had been a while since it's been apart. But here's the things that I came up with. The primary failure on the transmission is going to be blamed on the forward pinion bearing failure. And yes, it did kill the housing, so we're going to be putting the new updated gear carrier in here. I do not have an in-house machine shop, and I'm not even sure if I'd want to do it because I would prefer to have a housing that the center line on this hole and the center line on this hole is dead on accurate. And there's no bleed holes, so we'd have to punch a couple of those, which isn't too big of a deal. But I just like the new setup. The new one that Weddle has a fitting up here that can be used for, I wouldn't use it as a breather unless you run a baffle plate in the hose, but it's a great place for a breather. It's also a great place if you want to spray the backside of third and fourth gear if you have a pump system, so that's kind of cool. So the two jam nuts that were on the forward side of the pinion were very loose. No tools needed to take them off. And once again, I haven't said this for a while, but the pinion preload nut, I took it off my hand. No sign of Loctite, and I didn't even have to open up the divots to spin it because they were never peened all the way into the splines. They're supposed to be hammered into the splines on the pinion so that it doesn't rotate if it did try to come loose. He has an older style main shaft. We call it the early 2D main shaft. It has, just like the one that we just did, it has fourth gear bearing race built into it. And it looks like this is going to fail the crack check right now, but it's got some pits in it, so we're going to probably end up replacing this. But even if it doesn't fail the crack check, I always recommend to change these out. Because they have a retainer that holds the third gear and the slider assembly in, and this one was broken, and it was known back in the early days for these to fail, and when they break it can allow stuff to kind of shift around and cause all kinds of weird damage. So we're going to be updating his reverse gear and putting the new 3.4 RM gear in there. Updating that. He does have one steel bearing, but all the other bearings are going to get updated because they're all plastic, with the exception of fourth gear. But fourth gear bearing is going to get replaced anyway because fourth gear left the chat. So we got that to deal with. One of the things on a joking note, I don't know who did the weld on this, but somebody tried to weld the shift fork. You guys know how much I hate people that do that. If it's racing, yes. Glamis, no. Use the ARP bolt so you can get them tight enough where they won't slip. But whoever did this weld, you didn't even penetrate the metal on the 3.4 shift fork. So thank God your welding sucked because I didn't have to cut it off. When I go to change this all out, I'll just walk that over to the grinder and shave that down, so that's cool. And then here's something that's really cool. I haven't seen this happen in a while. I don't know if you guys can see it, but twisted splines on the long shaft. And the bearings in both of these housings are bad. They're making a lot of noise. So this one's going to need at least one drive flange. Because the new drive flanges, I'll show you what one looks like. These are the new Whittle racing ones. They actually have cutouts. You see those cutouts right there for the CV balls so they can get extra clearance. So these are really, really nice, the newer ones. So if you change one, it's a good idea to change them both, but they're not cheap, so only, you know, it's kind of one of those deals, how much is the budget worth, right? So walking through on this, the question somebody would have is what would be the best way to prevent this? Pinion bearings absolutely shot because the pinion preload nut came back off. We really need to make sure that we're torquing the pinion preload nut. The consensus is a minimum of 100 pounds. I torque them to 110 foot-pounds. And then I red thread lock them, and then I pin them. You know, you want a certain amount of preload on the bearing. There's a science to it, but you don't want this pinion shaft to spin super free, because then when the case actually comes up to temperature, it can actually allow the bearings to chatter a little bit. So you want just a little bit of preload on that bearing, which means that when you go to spin the pinion, it's not completely free. It's got just a little bit of drag on it. And then I showed this already. This is what's left of the forward pinion bearing that came apart. And then if you look inside of the nut and bolt bin right here, you will see what's left of the teeth that came off of fourth gear. So my recommendation when somebody asks, you know, how often should my transmission get refreshed, it really depends on your driving style. But if you're trying to get 4 years out of a 2D behind an LS and you drive with any sort of fun, 4 years is pushing it. I actually recommend at minimum every 2 years to have it open up and looked at, because when this happens, it gets really expensive. Changing the bearing before that happens is not that bad. So, Ron with Sandcar Services, I appreciate you watching, and we got one more to open up. Let's get busy.